Welcome to the journey into one of history's most enduring mysteries. Long before history had a name, before calendars measured time and before memory was written into stone, the world moved slowly under wide and empty skies. The land was vast and untouched, shaped only by wind, rain, and the quiet passing of seasons, and within this calm and endless world, the first humans appeared not suddenly, but gradually, almost unnoticed, small figures walking across plains and forests, guided by instinct rather than knowledge, their lives unfolding in silence, their thoughts simple and immediate, focused not on tomorrow or the distant future, but on the present moment, on warmth, on hunger, on safety, and on rest. They woke with the rising sun not because of purpose but because light returned, and they rested when darkness fell because the night belonged to uncertainty. Their bodies adapted to long walks and changing climates. Their minds learned patience before they learned speech, and every step they took was cautious, listening to the ground beneath their feet, the wind moving through trees, and the distant sounds of animals sharing the same space. There were no paths, no borders, and no destinations, only movement shaped by need. They did not seek to control the land, because the idea of control did not yet exist. Instead, they existed within nature as one small part of a larger rhythm, understanding without words that survival came not from force but from awareness. From noticing changes in the air, from recognizing which plants could be eaten and which must be avoided, from sensing danger before it arrived. Their days passed slowly, marked not by hours but by sensations, the warmth of sunlight on skin, the ache of tired muscles, the quiet relief of finding water, and the calm that followed a successful day of survival. Communication was limited, sounds and gestures carried meaning, but silence was more common than speech, and in that silence, observation became their greatest skill. They watched animals move in groups, learned when herds traveled and when they rested, noticed how birds reacted to danger, and slowly, over countless generations, these observations shaped behavior. Not through teaching but through imitation, knowledge passed quietly from one life to the next without words, without records, and without certainty. Every generation faced the same challenges anew, and yet, with each passing age, the first humans became slightly more aware of the world around them, slightly more prepared to endure it. Their existence was fragile, brief, and easily forgotten by time, but it was within this fragile beginning that humanity first learned to slow down, to listen, and to survive. And as the sun set again over the empty land, the world remained calm, vast, and patient, waiting for humanity to continue its long and quiet journey forward. As generations passed quietly and without record, the world around the first humans continued to transform in ways that were slow but unforgiving. Climates shifted gradually, winters stretched longer than before, summers felt shorter and weaker, and the land that once offered food with relative ease began to demand patience, endurance, and constant awareness. The first humans did not understand these changes as events or eras. They felt them through their bodies, through colder nights that lingered, through hunger that lasted longer, through fatigue that returned more often. Survival was no longer only about moving from place to place, it became about enduring what could not be avoided. The wind grew harsher across open plains, rain arrived less predictably, and familiar paths slowly disappeared beneath ice, mud, or snow. Fire began to take on a deeper meaning, not as a tool of progress, but as a rare and fragile moment of comfort. When flames appeared, humans gathered closer together, movement slowed, breathing softened, and for a short time the world felt less threatening. Shadows danced on stone walls. Time seemed to pause, and silence became calmer rather than dangerous. The land itself started to speak more clearly to those who listened long enough. Footprints told stories of animals that had passed. Broken branches warned of unseen movement. The absence of birds signaled danger, and subtle changes in the air hinted at storms yet to come. The first humans learned that rushing wasted energy, and energy was life. Every movement became more deliberate, every action more considered. Tools slowly improved, not through invention, but through repetition. Stones were chosen carefully, edges shaped with patience. Efficiency mattered more than strength. A cleaner cut meant less effort. Less effort meant survival. Group living became essential. Solitude meant vulnerability. Togetherness meant shared awareness. Communication deepened without words. A glance could warn of danger. A pause could signal safety. Trust was built through shared endurance rather than promises. Children learned not through instruction but through observation. Elders taught simply by surviving long enough to be watched. Mistakes were costly and lessons permanent. The environment offered no forgiveness. Cold shaped behavior. Hunger shaped patience. Pain shaped memory. There was little space for hope and no time for despair. Survival continued regardless of emotion. Storms arrived suddenly and without warning. Ice crept across familiar ground. Animals migrated or vanished entirely, forcing humans to adapt. Again and again, movement followed patterns rather than instinct alone. Seasons were noticed even if they were not named. Life narrowed to its most essential elements: warmth, food, safety, rest. Illness remained deadly, injury often final. Loss became familiar. Mourning was quiet and brief because survival did not pause for grief, and yet humanity persisted, not through power or dominance, but through resilience, slowly shaping itself to a colder, harsher, quieter world, learning not to resist change, but to move with it. And as ice claimed more land and silence grew heavier, the first humans continued forward, step by step, breath by breath, existing within the world rather than against it, patient, aware, and enduring as the world continued its slow descent into colder ages. The presence of ice became impossible to ignore. Glacier expanded silently across distant lands. Rivers froze longer each year, and the air itself felt heavier, sharper, and less forgiving. The first humans did not name this change. They simply lived within it, adapting without understanding its cause. Their movements grew more calculated, their journeys shorter and more purposeful, because energy had become the most valuable resource. Warmth was no longer a comfort but a necessity. Fire was guarded carefully, protected from wind and rain, carried when possible, and mourned when lost. Nights grew longer and darker, and the silence of frozen landscapes felt deeper than before. Animals changed their patterns. Some grew thicker fur, some migrated farther, and some disappeared entirely, forcing humans to follow unfamiliar paths into unknown territories. Danger increased not only from predators but from the environment itself. Frost-bitten ground could injure, cold air could weaken, and hunger could slowly erase strength. Shelters became more intentional. Caves were chosen with care. Openings were blocked from wind. Hides were layered for insulation, and bodies gathered closer together for shared warmth. Group bonds strengthened through necessity. Isolation meant exposure, togetherness meant survival. Communication evolved gradually. Gestures became clearer, sounds more meaningful, and repetition gave birth to shared understanding. Knowledge became something to protect, remembering where warmth lasted longest, where animals returned, where shelter endured storms. Memory itself became a survival tool. Children learned through constant observation, absorbing patterns of behavior without explanation. Elders became living records of experience, valued not for authority but for endurance. Life moved slowly, marked by cold mornings, cautious movement, and long periods of waiting. Storms could trap groups for days, forcing stillness, silence, and reflection. Hunger sharpened awareness, pain encouraged caution, fear became controlled rather than overwhelming. Panic had no place in a frozen world. Adaptation continued quietly, clothing improved. Through layered hides, tools became more specialized, not through innovation but through need. Efficiency shaped every decision, even emotion became restrained. Energy wasted on excess feeling could not be spared. Loss remained frequent, illness unforgiving, injury often final. Yet humanity continued to exist, not as a force shaping the world, but as a presence shaped by it, learning to endure cold, scarcity, and uncertainty. Learning to wait through long winters without knowing when warmth would return, and as ice dominated more of the land and silence stretched further across the world, the first humans remained, breathing slowly, moving carefully, and carrying life forward through patience, awareness, and quiet resilience. As the Ice Age reached deeper into the world, cold became a constant presence rather than a passing condition. Glacier stretched across vast distances, shaping valleys and covering once familiar lands. And the environment itself dictated every decision the first humans made. Movement slowed further, not from weakness but from necessity. Each journey was planned through observation and memory. Energy was guarded carefully, because wasting strength in a frozen world could mean the end. Fire became the center of survival, not a symbol but a lifeline, protected from wind, fed with scarce fuel, and shared among those who gathered close. Nights grew heavier, longer, and quieter. The sound of wind across ice replaced the sounds of forests and rivers. Animals adapted in visible ways, growing thicker coats, changing routes, or disappearing entirely, forcing humans to follow new paths into harsher territories. Hunting required patience, coordination, and timing. Failure meant hunger, success meant temporary relief. Shelters evolved slowly, caves were reinforced, entrances narrowed, hides led to hold warmth, and the ground was insulated to reduce the cold's reach. Social bonds strengthened under pressure, trust became essential, cooperation was no longer optional. Shared survival replaced individual effort. Communication deepened through repetition and familiarity. Expressions, gestures, and tones carried meaning without the need for words. Memory became critical, remembering safe paths, reliable shelters, and seasonal patterns. Elders were valued for experience rather than authority. Children absorbed knowledge simply by being present, watching, listening, and imitating. Long winters forced stillness, days passed with little movement, conserving energy, waiting for conditions to change. Hunger tested patience, cold tested endurance, and silence tested the mind. Emotion was restrained, not from lack of feeling, but from the understanding that excess drained strength. Loss was common, death was accepted quietly because survival demanded continuation. Even in grief, adaptation continued, tools became more efficient, clothing improved through layered hides, and strategies refined through repetition rather than invention. Humanity did not conquer the ice, it learned to live within it, shaped by cold, scarcity, and time. And as glacier dominated the land and the world seemed frozen in stillness, the first humans remained, moving slowly, breathing steadily, and carrying life forward through cooperation, memory, and quiet resilience. As the ice slowly began to retreat and the world shifted from the harsh dominance of glacier to gentler seasons, the first humans experienced changes they could not fully understand, yet felt deeply in their bodies and routines. Rivers flowed longer without freezing, fertile soil reappeared where ice had once reigned, forests expanded, and animals returned along paths long abandoned. Humans adapted once more, moving carefully into new lands, exploring cautiously, testing unfamiliar resources. Every step deliberate, every pause significant. Fire continued to be a center of survival and community, now offering warmth and safety against unpredictable weather rather than the constant presence of ice. Shelters became slightly more secure. Layered hides and cave spaces allowed longer periods of rest. Energy was still precious, still carefully guarded, yet the world felt less threatening than it had for countless generations. Hunting and gathering required observation, patience, and cooperation, but success was slightly more certain, and temporary abundance could be celebrated quietly before the next challenge arrived. Social bonds strengthened further, trust and shared knowledge became invaluable. Children continued to learn through observation, elders guided through living example rather than instruction. Memory preserved essential information about seasons, food, water sources, and animal behavior. Patterns that had once been learned through necessity were now understood and remembered with intention. Language likely began to expand slowly, forming from repeated gestures, sounds, and shared experiences. The ability to communicate became more complex, yet still grounded in survival and awareness rather than abstract thought. The first humans slowly developed a sense of continuity, of history carried forward from one generation to the next. Survival was no longer purely instinctive, but layered with learned behavior, observation, and patience. As the ice retreated and the climate moderated, humans encountered landscapes rich in variety, allowing them to experiment with tools, refine techniques, and begin shaping their environment in small ways, yet always within the boundaries set by nature. They did not dominate the world immediately, but moved cautiously, aware of its power and unpredictability. Over time, gradual improvements in hunting strategies, shelter construction, and social organization allowed small communities to stabilize. Cooperation became more nuanced, knowledge more codified in habits and practices. The rhythm of life remained deliberate, slow, and careful. Even as opportunities increased, humans retained the patience and endurance forged through millennia of hardship. Memory became a bridge across generations, teaching caution, resilience, and awareness. The silence of ice was replaced by the quieter hum of life returning. Yet the lessons of patience, adaptation, and observation remained ingrained. the first humans continued to exist not as rulers, but as participants in a vast, slowly changing world, learning, enduring, and observing, carrying forward the practices, instincts, and resilience that had allowed their species to survive countless ages of cold and scarcity. And as the sun rose and set across newly verdant lands, humans breathed, moved, hunted, rested, and lived with a sense of continuity, of being part of a rhythm that stretched back to the first cautious steps on frozen plains. And as night fell, the world remained patient, silent, and vast, allowing humanity to persist, to endure, and to grow slowly into the beings who would one day remember, record, and reflect, carrying forward the quiet, deliberate, and enduring spirit that had been forged in the long, cold, and patient heart of the Ice Age.